Guys, so in this video, we are going to learn how to work with components in Vue.js, and surely we will start from the very basics, learning what is a component, how we can define it, how we can register it and use it and pass data to it, and so on. So the first step is actually to learn what is a component. So a component is a reusable block of code that represents a specific element on the page. And if you think about it, every web page or web application has a specific structure that we can divide into modules or components in this case. So if we take a look at this basic web page, we have an header, we have a site content, and we have a site footer. Each of these parts can be divided into subcomponents. Like we have an navbar and the new image we have inside the main content. We could have a section where, for instance, we could have a bot component, an image component, or a section for the description, so kind of description component. So each section could be divided into subcomponents, and itself could be a component. So if we think about it, in every page we could have many components and subcomponents. So what is a component at the end? It's a reusable block of code that has specific and dedicated HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. So we can use them to organize our code and build complex layout that are easy to maintain and future-proof, and of course can be reused every time we need them in our page. So to get started with components, we need first learn how to register a component, how to pass data to it, and how to use it. So the first thing is going to be learn how to use a component. So we need to go inside the main.js file and register a component. So what we have here is a basic Vue instance, and on this side we have the basic HTML structure that we need with a root element. So we have also the Vue.js CDN, the side sheet, and the script that we need to use. Then we have the root element for the Vue application, that is this div with an ID of app. On this side, we have this basic Vue instance. So here we can use the Vue function to define a new component, and so we registered using the Vue object. So Vue dot, and then after the dot, we can use the component function to register the component. So after we registered, we can assign to it a name. So we type component, and after that, so we type the name of the component that we want to create. So we might call it like text component. And after that, the second parameter is going to be an option, which will have inside it all the properties that we need for the component. So every component needs to have a template property at least. So without it, of course, the component will not make any sense. So the next step is gonna be add this template property. So this is how we define the template component. Then we need to tell to this template property what we should put inside it. So what is its structure? So inside the backtick, we can define some HTML markup, and For instance, we can just say split a paragraph in here, and in here we can just say I'm a component. Okay, so later on we will see how to use it in a better way, but for now it's fine because we only need to learn the basics and how to register it. So now that we have the component and we have registered the component, we can use it on the HTML. So inside this div with the ID of app, we can call this component using its name. So as we do with with all the other HTML tags, we can put this name of the component and it will be rendered as any other HTML tag. So we write test component and the opening tag and the closing tag will define our opening and closing component. And of course, this component is inside this div with an ID of app, otherwise it won't work. Then we can open the browser and see what happens. So let's open the browser and open the live server. And let's see what's going on. Okay, so we have these I am a component onto the page. We see that, and let's see what's going on. We have these, let me resize this window. So we have the component HTML and we can inspect the tag. Let me open the inspector and show you what we have. But before that, since the component is inside this div with an ID of app, the view instance will recognize the component because we registered it on the view object, and it reads the template and it outputs the content of the template inside the HTML file. So if we inspect the page, we will see the component which is made of a paragraph. And here we have the paragraph and we have the component inside it. So of course for now the component doesn't do anything. If we copy this component tag multiple times, we will see that on the HTML page we will see more components. So I am a component multiple times onto the page. So what we need to do now is actually pass something to this basic component. So let me just comment this out and taking that example. So starting from the simple tweet application that we built in the previous video, we could build a component that we could later on use to customize the view application for Twitter. So we could be building a Twitter message component, something like that. Let me comment that out as well. And in here, what I want to type is define a new component. So like tweet message. So this is going to be the name of my new component. And surely before that we need to register the component. So for now you won't see anything onto the page. So let me call the view object and the component method, and the first parameter will be the name of the component, so tweet message. Let me copy that and paste it in there, and then the second parameter will be an object like we did before as the second parameter. So after that we could change the content of the template, and let's move that on new line, and let's change the markup for this component. For instance, we could have two paragraphs and say tweet message go here and then goes here. So the tweet message, that's where we would put it, and then after the message we could have another paragraph or wherever we want to render the date of the tweet. So now we have two paragraphs inside the component, but there is a problem. When we build the components, there can be only one root element inside the template property, so we need to wrap everything, so these two paragraphs inside another tag, which will be the root tag. So let me write this div, and it will be the root element, and we put the paragraphs inside it. So without this div, we will get an error. So now, oops, okay. The next thing that I want to do is show you how to use the component. So first, let's see what we have on the page. So we have this with component with two paragraphs inside. So the tweet message goes here and the tweet date. So the next step will be learn how to output some data inside the component and actually make it dynamic and change the content that it shows. Because so far it doesn't matter if we copy this component multiple times, but we will see always the same stuff. So we will see always tweet message goes here and tweet date here. So the next thing will be learn how to pass data to the component. And to do that, we will need to use props. So given what we learned so far, we want to pass data to our component like we did previously to binding data between the view instance and our markup. So using the mustache syntax, but with component, things work a little bit differently. We need to use a new property called props that creates a binding between our component and its template. So the props property can be defined in two ways. So let me first add this property inside this component. So I'll write props, so that's the name of the property, and then we can define it as an array of strings or as an object. So let me first define it as an array, and inside the array we'll put all the properties that I want to use inside the component template. And later we could use inside the component like we always do inside the view instance and their templates. So otherwise we could use we could write props as an object. So that's the first option, and the other option would be write props column and the curly braces, and inside the object we could specify as a key the name of the property that we want to use it inside the template, and as a value the type of the data that we expect. So we expect to put inside this property, so it can be a string, a number, or wherever you want. So the first thing that the first option that I'm going to use will be, for now, we will do both for now, but for now I will use the array first, and then I'll show you how to use the other option, so as an object. So inside this square brackets, I can put, for instance, let's say that I want to replace this with the text for the tweet, so just text property. And for the other one, I want to replace it with date property. So inside the props property, we can define two elements, so text and date. Now, the very cool part is just what happens after that. So now these two properties will become two attributes that we can use as any other HTML attribute, and we can use them inside the component. So we can pass to them something different from the text and something different for the date. So let's say, for instance, that we can output like a text that says wherever you want, so just hello components or something like that. And then we can use the other property So we can say here for date July 2021. So now when we refresh the page, you will see that we have hello components and July 2021 as its date. So now if we want, we can change the content of the other, so add more components and change the content of the text and the date properties, and we will have different, everything different on the page. So we can write here hello free.camp, and for the date August 2021, and for the other component we can write my menu component or menu tweet is cool, and in any kind of date or whatever you want, and so on. So you will see now that when we refresh the page, we have three different tweets, and they are rendered to the page using our new component. And for each of them, the data are different. And we learned how to use props as an array, but we could, as I said before, we said that these props can be an object. So let me show you how to do that with props as an object. So as the property name, we will have a text and its value will be the string. So we expected that for the property text, we have a string. And then for the date, we will have another string, and that's fine, but it could be anything else, anything that you want, a number, a date, object, or whatever. So now everything still works, and we are still able to use text and date inside the components as any other HTML attribute, and they are used to output something different onto the page for each component. And as you see, the result is not changing at all. So using this approach, we can render our application like that. Or if we want to make the date work differently, we could maybe pass to the date property. We could use the new date, and for instance, let me show you what I mean. So I could just write inside the date, and in here I will write like the actual just the date using the new date, and then the current date will be to local string. So we want that to be a string. But when we refresh the page, as you see, this is what's happened. We rendered string as it is. We are not parsing the data. So this code is not computed as a JavaScript code, but it's computed as a simple string. So that's just an HTML attribute. So to make this work, we actually need to bind this date property, this date attribute. And after we do that, you will see that when we refresh the page, we have the actual date that is given to us by the new date function. So that's how these props work, and how we can pass data to the component using props. But there is another part that we need to discuss, because we have studied that when we use the view instance, inside the view instance we have the data object. So usually we used to have this data object like that, but when we are working with components, the data object works a little bit differently, because inside this component we have a data function that will actually return an object. So it's not available as an object, but it's available as a method of the component. And so it will return an object. And after that, we will be able to use this data returned by the data function to make each component independent from the other. So following this example, we can use data property for classes and IDs, but also we could make a component interactive maybe in a future lesson we could add like functionality to our Tweet application. So inside the component we will see how make things work, and that will show us how they are independent one from the other. But for now, let's see simply how to make the data work inside the component. So let me bind the class attribute and bind it so that we can read it and we can define the value of the property and read it from the actual data property. So let's say we have a class, and this class should be a tweet box property. So tweet box wrapper property, and we bind this class attribute so that we can now use inside the component the data function and render it, and then we can have another one, another class, and bind it to a date class. So now these two are bound to the component itself, and we need now to define a data function that returns an object. So this data method will return an object. So that's the return, and let me correct the typo. Okay, so this data method will return an object, and this is going to be the actual data object for the component. And in here we can grab this tweet box wrapper and define it as a property and assign to it any value that we want, like tweet message. So that's the class that I want to write, and in here I will grab the date class and add to it a date value. So inside the data object now I define these two property, and when we look inside the HTML, this tweet message will be rendered into the component, and if we inspect it, you will see that when we save the page, you will see that this component has this class. Let me see if it works. It doesn't. Since it works, let me check if I made a typo somewhere. Let's see where is the error. Let me refresh the page and look at it. So we have a property of method tweet box wrapper which is not defined, but it's rendered onto the page but not defined. So tweet box wrapper seems correct, and that's the issue that we have. It's not date. The problem is that we don't have the data object, but I made a typo. I wrote date object, so that's not the correct one, so I need to change that to data object, so the data, not date. So let's refresh the page and see what we have. So we no longer have any error, and if we check at the markup, you will see that in the markup we have this paragraph with the class tweet message, and the other one has tweet date class. So it works fine, and the connection between each of the components works correctly, and that's how we can bind this information from the component to the data object, so from the template to the data object. And the next step will be actually how to learn how to define different properties inside this data object. Maybe properties that takes the date, and then we can use this date and render it into the component, and so we can move a bit forward with this component data object.